Last year I made this screen door for the rear of the house. And my intentions for this year to increase the flow of air through the house during the hot summer months was to use this cheap budget fly curtain. Unfortunately, it didn't really fit, so I went to plan B, and being a woodworker, it involved making some wooden frames. Unlike last year's version, I'm using some plain timber rather than some slate batten I had hanging about the garden. But, like last year, I used some spare offcuts of plywood to make the gussets that would reinforce the corners. The first job was to make the frame for the screen, so I took some measurements of where I would like the frame to sit in front of the door frame on the outside of the house, and then took out my ladder based crosscut station and cut the wood to size. Once I had my 4 components to make the frame, it was a case of then making 8 gusset plates would join the frame and later the door part together. These are roughly cut to 4 inch or 100mm square, and then the corner cut off. Now I had my 8 components for the frame. It was just a case of easing all the corners with the block plane and then sanding the components. The gusset plates were pre-drilled, and then I glued and screwed them to the head and base of the sections before then connecting them to the 2 jambs. Now my workshop has developed to a usable space, I could easily do this at the bench and support the frame at the other side. Look out for another video soon of the development of this small workshop. And once the frame was together, it was an easy check to ensure it fitted the hole, all under the supervision of Gracie and her mate Stripey. Before I went any further, I wanted to check that this spring-loaded closure was going to work properly. It's a different design to what I'm used to, but it appears much better than the one that I got for the back door, which always threatens to take your knuckles off. So now the outer frame was made, I could get my measurements for the inner frame and cut out the 4 components, ensuring that I had no knots in the middle of the timber, unlike last time when after making the door one of the stiles fell in half. Again, before making up the door frame, I just eased all the corners with the block plane. Now I'm using these pin hinges that lets me lift the door on and off when I'm not using it. And the easiest way to set these hinges is to put a small V in the frame and the stile of the door so the spindle of the hinge falls in that gap. And then using a trick I've used many times over the years, I hung the hanging stile of the door into the frame before building the rest of the door. Because I'm using relatively thin stock and there's a little bit of a bow in the timber, I just put a clamp across the pieces whilst fitting the middle hinge. Just to fit the door rails together, temporary, before I fit the gussets, just inserted a pocket hole screw in each corner. There, I'm happy how this opens and closes. Just to keep the door and frame square whilst I fit the gussets, I needed to find something that was as wide as the gap. An end-on chisel was perfect, so I just clamped it in place and now glue and screw the 4 corner gussets on. Note, I'm overlapping the gussets onto the frame, which acts as a stop when the door closes. And with this now finished, I've got a perfect gap all around the door, so there's no binding. Now from the pack of 1¼ inch by 1½ inch that I bought from the DIY shop, I was just 2 pieces short, one for the middle rail and one for a diagonal brace. so I cut down a piece of timber that was left over from the barn doors. The middle rail is pocket hole screwed into the frame. And the diagonal bracing is marked and mitered to fit in the corner under the gusset, ensuring it's cutting away to support the head of the door from the middle hinge. Now, unlike the door I made for the rear of the house last year, I'm only putting a diagonal brace in the top section of the door. The reason for this will become clear soon. Now, to finish the door, I have two remaining gussets to make. One of them, the one on the non-closure side, is more oblong with two diagonals that tie the middle rails and the diagonal rails all together. Gracie has now worked out that the window in the workshop is perfect height so she can keep an eye on the local wildlife down the garden. And the final gusset is a long thin affair to let the rolling spring closure move down its length during the door operation. It also needs a packer on the door frame to make sure that everything sits in line. Like a lot of woodwork around here, if I leave it hanging around long enough, Lynn will give it a coat of leisure, a kind of French wood stain. Now, going back to that cheap budget shop €5 fly screen, the idea was it should be velcroed to the frame, and then because it has magnets down its central point, you can walk in and out without opening anything. But in reality, every time you walk through it, it dislodged from the velcro fasteners and you ended up wearing it. So, not wanting to waste anything, we stapled it to the inside face of this screen door. I can now reattach the hinges and hang the screen back in its frame. I can plumb and fix the whole thing in the door opening. And finally attach and set the spring closer. And now I can induct my loved ones into the operation of this fly screen. First Lynn, yes, I think she's got it, and lastly Gracie. Why I didn't fit the diagonal in the bottom, just to give me a respite from playing dog butler. And the last job, Lynn sewed up the central opening from the top right down to the middle rail. We have left the section from the middle rail to the bottom rail just attached with its magnets. We can leave both front and back door open, enjoy the flow of air through the house and be fly free. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you again soon.